That's my cue to go ahead and get us started. Welcome, and my name is Nina Morgan. I use she, they pronouns, and I am based in Birmingham, Alabama, and I work as a movement organizing fellow with Project South. So it's really great seeing so many familiar faces, and we're really in for a treat. So without further ado, this is the Art of Strategy, Building Solidarity Across Generations. And this is a series that is a collaboration between the SMA and the National Council of Elders. And so the Southern Movement Assembly commenced our solstice year this spring to reset, realign, and renew our collective commitment to movement governance. We recognize that in order to expand, we need to be clear. In order to change, we need to be rooted and in our foundations and our history, right? And in order to act, we need a collective plan and a process for implementation. And so after celebrating 10 years of the Southern Movement Assembly, we are building a path to really reimagine our structures in alignment with our commitments to address the movement and the urgent needs of this time. And so from the action plan we created together at SMA 10, quote, the infrastructure that we build together is like a web that holds us. And infrastructure for us means connected systems of care, governance, education, culture, safety, skill building, communications, and crew building. And we recognize a global focus with a local application rooted in mutual respect. We invited all of you as beloved members of our Southern Movement community to join us to be an active participant in the summer season of intergenerational dialogue and political education and shared learning. And that's what this is today. So thank you for being here. Tonight is the first in a series of intergenerational conversations that are going to happen once a month throughout the summer to share ideas and learn from each other. So if you have any questions or just things that are resonating, please highlight them in the chat. Feel free to place them in the chat and also introduce yourself in the chat if you're comfortable. So yeah, without further ado, I will pass to my co-moderator, Sam, who will introduce themselves and the amazing Loretta Ross and move us into our conversation. Sam?
Yes, hello, thank you, Nina. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with SMA. I am so excited. For those of you who don't know me, which is a lot of people, my name is Sam Blakely. I use she, her pronouns. I am the member governance organizer at Black Feminist Future. We're a movement organization who believes in galvanizing the social and political power of Black women, girls, and gender expansive folks to Black liberation. So that's what we do. And I'm so excited to be here in conversation with the amazing folks I'm going to be in conversation with. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Loretta J. Ross. Loretta Ross is an organizer, a public intellectual, author, and scholar. So she started her career in activism and social change in the 1970s and played leadership roles at the National Black Women's Health Project, the Center for Democratic Renewal, formerly National Anti-Klan Network, the National Center for Human Rights Education, and SisterSong Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. Her passion is innovating, creative imagining about global human rights and social justice issues. As the third director of the first rape crisis center in the country in the 1970s, she helped launch the movement to end violence against women. She founded the first center in the US to innovate creative human rights education for all people so that social justice issues are more collaborative and less divisive. She has also deprogrammed members of hate groups, leading to conceptualization and writing the first book on calling in the call out culture to transform how people can overcome political differences, to use empathy and respect to guide difficult conversations. Her most recent books are Reproductive Justice, An Introduction, co-written with Rickie Solinger, and Radical Reproductive Justice, Foundations, Theory, Practice, Critique. Her forthcoming book is calling in the calling out culture. So I'm, again, just really excited to be in dialogue with Nina and Loretta, because I think in the movement, sometimes we want to go back to our North Stars and we're like, oh, I wonder what they said or what they did. And it's like, we have people right here, like Loretta Ross is right here. We can ask, we can collaborate together. So this is a wonderful opportunity. So I'm really excited, and I hope everyone is greedy in their intake of knowledge, right? And their quest for knowledge and curiosity and all of that good stuff. So I would love to start out asking Ms. Ross. So we're talking about the art of strategy, right? And strategy means, it's what we need to win, right? So I would love to know about your organizing experience from your movement work, just, describing like the opposition and the conditions, the outcomes, the wins. Just tell us about your movement work experience.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Suzanne, for inviting me. I'm so honored to be with the Southern Movement Assembly. Of course, I remember when we hosted the World Social Forum here in Atlanta, from which the SMA grew. I started out as an activist at age 16 as a first-year student at Howard University in 1970. And that was when the country was still in an uproar over the assassination of Dr. King. But also at the same time, we were in a fight in Washington, D.C. for home rule, because Congress controls what happens in Washington, D.C. And in 1973, the Home Rule Act was passed, and we had such bright visions of what could happen, because we were going to stop being a colony, stop having Congress dictate our budget and what laws we could pass and all that stuff. Most of that didn't come to pass because the left fell out fighting with each other. I mean, it was just a big mess. And even though I was young, I could see how all the leftist organizations, who were all called communists, that, by the way, whether they were actually communists or not, didn't really matter to the Republicans in Congress, because they were going to brand us all with that same brush, even if whatever we were doing. And the splintering of the left in the 1970s meant that we didn't get to have 2 congressional representatives in Congress, which President Carter had promised to support if we could agree on a strategy. Do you know what have happened to America if Washington, D.C. was able to send 2 senators to Congress? I mean, it would have changed the entire trajectory of this country. And so that was my earliest understanding of how the call out culture, when we turn on each other instead of turn to each other, is not only personally damaging, but politically damaging. And it thwarts our best efforts to make America finally live up to its promises. And so at 16, 17, 18, 19, I didn't know, I don't have the word, I didn't have the words back then to describe what I'm analyzing now, but I knew it wasn't right how we became so embittered in trying to be right rather than trying to be powerful. And so doing the anti-rape work at the Rape Crisis Center, I learned to go down to Lorton Reformatory, the prison for DC, and teach Black feminist theory to Black men who were incarcerated for raping and murdering women. And I felt that if I, as a rape and incest survivor, could talk to these men, how come I can't talk to my comrades in the movement? What is keeping us from coming together? And if you fast forward another 30 years, I'm deprogramming white supremacists with Reverend C.T. Vivian and the Center for Democratic Renewal. These are not the people I want to have as my best friends, but if I could find a way to talk to ex-Nazis and ex-Klansmen, why can't we talk to people who don't know the latest lingo? who don't know that we don't use certain words anymore and stuff like that. So my biggest lesson that I would like to offer, I guess, is that we've got to learn to get over ourselves and stop being so dedicated to winning a stupid and often minor fight that we lose sight of the larger struggle that we're supposed to be participating in for the people we call ourselves representing. Because when you're more dedicated to to a woke competition, to what your ego is telling you you need to do, you're not representing anybody but yourself. You're not representing the very movements that you claim to be using and that you're speaking up for. Because the last thing they want is for us to be self-destructive and ineffective. Now, I say all of that just in closing. I'm not letting the right wing and the fascists off the hook. They do what they do because of who they are. So I'm not blaming the victim kind of thing. But I am saying that we are not doing all that we should be doing to build the power necessary to overwhelm and neutralize those fascists. And they're laughing all the way to power as we self-destruct with the call-out culture. And the way that I put it, and which is why I've dedicated the last decade of my activism to this, is that I think calling in will be as important to the human rights movement in the 21st century as nonviolence was to the civil rights movement in the 20th, because it's a statement of our values. It's a statement of the world we want to build. It's a statement of who we are, so that we are clear the difference between us and the enemy.
Just letting that land, like, wow. Wow. Absolutely, absolutely. And this, when you're talking, it reminds me of, you know, as I'm reading like emergent strategy and these different, these different resources for strategy, for creating like stronger infrastructure and things. I think it's so important that we go back to the building of the relationships, right? Like you were saying, why can't we talk to each other? That's a huge problem, right? We have to go back to the basics. So I appreciate you really calling that out, because I know for me, starting in my activism and advocacy back in the day, I was very new to everything. And I know I was saying all types of stuff. I was unlearning, right? We've been programmed by white supremacy. We've been programmed to love binaries and be like, this is right or this is wrong and all of that. And it's taken a lot for me to have to say, okay, let me sit down. Let me actually read what's behind this. Let me actually see what the impact is. So it's really hard, right? But it's part of the work that we have to do to unlearn. So we have to call in ourselves, right? We got to call in ourselves.
You got it. The thing that I say often is that we've taught radical analysis without radical love practices. So we use all that radical consciousness to brutalize each other because we do not understand the power of radical love.
Yeah, absolutely. This is resonating so much, because it seems like, especially like coming out of the pandemic, in the last few years, I feel like we're in this place now where, speaking for myself, like I'm seeing, formations and organizations and friendships, quite frankly, fall apart. And I think a lot of it does come from this place of wanting to be right and wanting to have like these internal power struggles, within like this call out culture versus, getting to the heart of the matter, naming harm, naming hurt, naming potentially what needs need to be met or what processes need to be put in place. And I know from my own experience organizing here in Birmingham, part of something that I'm always thinking about is, how am I making space and room for personal transformation in the organizing work that I do? How am I making space and room for relationship building in an authentic way, which for me means there's a necessity of being vulnerable. You know, I mean, I think real relationship building that's solid to withstand the forces that, you know, we're up against, that you talked about, Loretta, means that we have to be willing to be vulnerable sometimes. And yeah, I don't know if y'all, you know, want to speak to that more. But I am wondering like how vulnerability and the willingness to be vulnerable has shown up in kind of some of the things that you've talked about, Loretta, and even you, Sam. Like, I'd like to know about your experiences too.
Well, the thing that has taken me entirely too long to realize was that everyone who's drawn to human rights work is traumatized. So we shouldn't be in the oppression Olympics, nor should we be surprised that people are bringing their trauma into the work. We should plan for it. We should anticipate it. We should be trauma informed, but not trauma controlled. I mean, there is a difference. And so the fact that we have such imprecise ways of defining harm, we think that just because I've been hurt, I have the right to hurt others. The fact that we are leading with our anger against each other instead of leading with our love. I had to ask a woman in a training the other day up at Harvard. She said, I don't want to not display my anger because it makes me feel inauthentic and it makes me feel like I'm practicing respectability politics. And so I asked her, I said, well, are you comprised of anger? Who really are you? She said, I'm comprised of love. I said, well, why aren't you leading with that? Why aren't you showcasing who you are versus how the world has made you? Don't you realize you have a choice?
Yeah, and it's also just coming into this space. You know, I was in a time of like rapid response. The abortion bans were coming out and all of that. So I feel that I was projected kind of into a vulnerable space. I was a storyteller, so I felt, oh, I'm so vulnerable. I'm letting people know, and you know, this is why I'm doing this. You know, vulnerability will change hearts and rattle minds and shift policy, right? And it's just like as I got deeper in my organizing work, I was like, man, am I like feigning vulnerability? Like, am I actually being vulnerable with the people I'm building relationships with? Like, how can I be a better organizer? And it goes back to like not being like performatively vulnerable. So that's something I realized. I was like, oh man, it's kind of like a wall, but I'm saying so much, right? I'm telling people so much, but it's like, what is actually happening? Are you actually having an exchange with someone? Am I actually like looking into someone, learning and talking about humanity and how we can create the world that we want to create together in our wildest imaginations, right? In our wildest dreams? Because I think also just a side thing, like we're so, again, stuck in those binaries and we're so used to being told what our visions are and what, you know, how things should be. And it's like, how can we come together and build a container where we can imagine a world where people aren't hungry, right? Where we can imagine a world where people have what they need and people are in loving relationships with one another. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I see, and so there's a question in the chat that I want to lift up from Brian, who is saying, from my understanding, cancel culture arose out of a desire to hold people accountable. So in Brian is asking, should we stop holding people accountable, or are there certain exceptions? And I mean, I don't think what we're saying, Brian, is that we should stop holding people accountable. For me, like when I think about call out culture, I think about how call out culture is tethered to this disposability politic, and like in this like punitive way that for me like sometimes can look like the systems that we're trying to dismantle. But yeah, I want to open it up, Loretta, if you have a response to that as well.
Oh, there are totally appropriate uses of call out. I mean, this is what the human rights movement does. I mean, we call out governments, we call out individuals, we call out corporations who violate people's human rights. But what people fail to understand is that it's our tactic of last resort. It's the thing we do when you got to break the glass because the fire's going off, right? It is not the tactic of first resort. Before we get to the call out, We try talking to people. We negotiate. We find messengers that may make more of a dent in their consciousness before, than us. We do a whole lot of hard work of relationship building, of analysis, of not demonizing people. Because once you demonize something, you're not going to be able to talk to them respectfully. You're not going to care that they have feelings. You're not going to do anything that makes you effective with them. And so, yes, you should use call out when people are abusing their power over others and causing serious harm. You can use call outs to build community, to find out people who have experienced harm, who have been historically silenced. You can use call outs to prevent future harms. You can use call outs to when people won't make themselves accessible to you and you've tried other ways. So in my analysis, there are legitimate uses of call out, but let's be clear. But most times we're using it because we're replicating the tactics of the prison industrial complex. Because we believe that when someone has done something wrong for which we want to hold them accountable, that we need to punish them, silence them, exile them, and dispose of them. We don't ever want you to be around anymore. And I'm asking a very serious question. But those of us who believe in prison abolition, how well do we think the PIC tactics are going to work for us? It doesn't even work for the state.
Right.
And it's supposed to work for us, kind of thing. And yet people don't see the intellectual contradiction of using carceral tactics on each other, calling ourselves doing the right thing. I didn't mean to silence y'all. Sorry.
No, it's honestly, I'm processing. I'm like, okay, like it's landing. I'm processing. I'm like, that's exactly right. Like I put in the chat, like master's tools, as Audre Lorde says, like that's not going to get us anywhere. And how can we not replicate the structures of oppression that we're trying to fight? And I think it's so important to have like series like these as we are trying to find the art of strategy and how do we fortify the movement? How do we not cause harm? How do we hold people accountable in a way that's not punitive in the ways that we've been taught, under white supremacy? And it's just, this is so important to talk about and to really unpack. And I think that what is being brought up for me when you're talking, Loretta, and you as well, Nina, like the uncomfortableness, like sitting in the uncomfortability, I think that's the word, like just the uncomfortable
discomfort.
That's a better word. The discomfort of being seen as wrong or being seen as like, oh, I don't know everything, or I don't have the answers. And it's just like, I think we all have to understand that we don't have the answers and we can come together to create them, right? That's democracy is coming together. Like it's including everyone, making sure that no one is left out. So that's what's coming up for me as you're speaking.
I'm sorry, Nina, if you were going to speak, but the other thing is that we've got to let go of the expectation that we only can do effective work with perfect people who never make mistakes. Knowing damn well we ain't perfect ourselves. So we be fronting, pretending we all that, and then holding other people in very judgmental ways because they ain't perfect. And this whole toxic perfectionism, that's a definite feature of white supremacy. And so calling out assumes that people can't grow. And it also assumes that you already have grown enough for me to be able to work with you. How's that supposed to work?
Absolutely. Sometimes, like, especially some conflicts that I've been witnessing, I just think this could have been a phone call. Like this could have been like a direct dialogue between people. And instead it's kind of like, just evolved into, gossip and infighting and this and that and call out. And one thing I'm y'all blowing up the chat. I'm trying to keep track too. But one thing that Sylvia talked about, which kind of like connects to more of like this, like, how are we dealing with these things internally question is, naming the importance of leading with love. and resisting a culture of avoidance, of avoiding conflict. And I don't know if it's like, how can we do this from a place of love and without like just being completely conflict avoidant, which is something that I've witnessed, and not naming things, but there, it's like this, you're in these spaces and there's not like the elephant in the room isn't said, but it's felt. You can feel the tension. And so I'm wondering, like, I guess there's a question, and also just like this thought I'm thinking, where like I always wonder, like, how can that we make these spaces to be direct and transparent and honest with each other without being disrespectful and hurting each other. And I think maybe it's like, kind of to your point, Sam, and to your point, Loretta, like anticipating conflict and building the containers constantly and amending them that we need to move through that, so that we can stay solid and stay united. But yeah, anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Well, I want to do a quick commercial here. I teach calling in techniques online, and my next class starts August 1, and it's a 4-session class, and each class is only $5. So for the whole $20, you can go to my website, lorettajross.com, and my whole team will teach you technique. It's about the different roles that you can play, how you can intervene after the blow up has already happened. How can you set ground rules based on calling in? How can you help people recover their reputation after it's been damaged? How can you get the bystanders to play a different role? Because nobody wants a target on their forehead. That's why they don't speak up, because they're afraid that the whole call out is going to turn towards them. And so I've studied this for a decade, and now I teach it online. So come to the $5 consciousness raising if you want more on August 1st.
That's amazing. I love that this exists. It's so interesting because I just saw Nina at a National Black Organizing Conference not too long ago. And this is what we were talking about, right? This is how we make our movement stronger. This is how we make our folks within the movement stronger, like political. So first of all, this whole container here, this political education series, giving folks the tools that they need, but also they were talking about like conflict, right? And how avoiding conflict is, again, it's from white supremacy, right? We're taught to, not go around it, not go through it, right? And one of the things I know at BFF, we say in our like community agreements and things, and our ways of being, is we understand that conflict will grow us, right? And we have grace for folks to transform. And we were actually in like another thing talking about conflict not too long ago. And someone was talking about coming from a neutral space, because I know sometimes we're in these spaces and we hear people say, assume good intentions, don't assume bad ones. And we need to consider like coming to a neutral space, not assuming good or bad intentions, right? So that there's not that level of maybe perceived disrespect or perceived, favoritism or whatnot. And I just thought it was really interesting. And it was kind of like, that's different to me, right? It's different. I mean, conflict in general is kind of different to me. Just having it, I just want to go around it, but conflict will grow us, right? It's how we get strong. We have to go through it. We can't go around it.
Well, see, conflict is not only productive, it is that friction of different people having different ideas that adds to the pool of knowledge that gives you the best solution you can arrive at. If everybody's thinking the same, you're a cult. And so we want to invite conflict and not be afraid of it, but let's debate ideas. Let's not debate people's moral characters because they don't share the same ideas we have. It's one thing to go from saying you said something racist to you are a racist. Can't we make that distinction, or say something without even using the R word? When you said that phrase the other day, I'm not sure what you meant by that. Do you mind if we have some coffee and discuss it? I mean, there's so many other options we have other than to invite people into a fight when you should be inviting them into a conversation.
So what I'm hearing you say is we turn up on the state, not each other.
Yeah, but even in dealing with the state, don't paint the people in the state with the same broad brush. I mean, I used to talk to people all the time about the 1%ers. I said, there's 1%ers on the left, there's 1%ers on the middle, and there's 1%ers on the right. So if you treat everybody as if they're Elon Musk, then you don't even understand the difference between Elon Musk and Bill Gates. You know, where there's room to work, and you have to have an accurate analysis to have an accurate strategy of getting the results that you want. But if you walk into a meeting and you can't tell the difference between Musk and Gates, you're going to treat them all the same and lose the opportunity to inch forward the movement for justice that you had.
And I have to call myself out here, like, we'll call myself in here. You know, I was very much, and still am sometimes in that, get caught up in that of like, all billionaires, like go away, like all of that. And we're missing the nuance, right? We're missing why this shouldn't happen in the first place, right? So I think that also there's something to be said here about recognizing that, I'm just going back to the binaries again. We're just so like, we're so into the binaries of like what's right and what's wrong and yes and no. And we're missing the whole piece, and it helps us learn, right? It helps us understand, okay, this is the actual, like Angela Davis said, grasping at the root. This is the root of the thing, you know, not just like it's popular to hate billionaires now. So yeah,
I mean, there's a corruption to how they became billionaires, but there's corruption to the fact that we can buy a $5 blouse at Walmart.
right.
So if we don't recognize our own complicity in the exploitation of the world, we tend to want to cast blame on those who do it more successfully based on capitalist standards, while we let ourselves off the hook for not protesting our privilege living here in the global north.
I really appreciate the kind of like distinction you made in kind of describing, I have so many thoughts, so y'all bear with me, but I really appreciate that distinction when you're describing like call out as part of a stage of engagement, with something. And so, you can start with when there's that tension or that disagreement or grievance or whatever. It's like, how are we moving to get to a point of, okay, all modes of engagement have been exhausted, so we're moving to calling whatever out. Because, and it's not so much that we should, it's like, I appreciate you like kind of naming that it's not so much that we never engage and call out, but we engage with it in a principled way. And something that's coming up for me, like, I'm just thinking about like it happening just in communities I work in, man. Like, just, I do a lot of organizing work on the North Side, and it's a super fun site. And it's, the side of just environmental racism for decades and decades and centuries. And just thinking about all the trauma that our people have just, we all have, and how I've witnessed just this like thing that happens where, because of infighting, because of deep memory of, back in the day when like there's just this grievance that was never healed, and it's coming up in this conversation about how we shut this plant down, like, because these two people don't like each other in the community, and it's getting us, is really kind of like turning our attention away from the plant and kind of how to address these things. And so, I feel like I have a question about like what your advice is to younger people who find themselves in this like facilitation organizing place where, and maybe it's just to get training, where we're having to mediate a conflict And I also have a question around, like, you mentioned, you know, calling in or like navigating being in space with white supremacists, you know, imprisoned and you know, having conversations with people that have raped other people. And I wish we had more time, because I just want to sit and like, I really would like to learn about like your fortitude to do that. Like, you know, like what was it that kind of like made you stay in the room? Like what was that grounding? I hope those questions made sense and those thoughts, but that's just what's going through my mind right now.
I was lucky enough to develop my consciousness in Washington, D.C., because I came from very conservative parents, San Antonio, Texas, dad in the military, hey, Reuben, you know, that kind of thing, and, you know, evangelical mom. So I didn't get political education while I was growing up in San Antonio on the east side, you know, hey, Reuben. But when I got to Howard University and I became an activist, I was lucky enough to encounter a lot of older Black women who didn't give up on insufferable me, because I was mouthy. We used to have a phrase, we called them handkerchief heads, and all kinds of words we used to say about them, because we thought we had all the answers and blah, blah, blah. And they were patient with me. And even when I made my largest mistakes, they didn't dispose of me. And that's what allowed me to stay around. I mean, some of my mistakes ended up in the Washington Post. I didn't think I could raise my head again in the movement. And they came in and called me back in and said, no, we ain't giving up on you. That's what we have to offer to each other. The reverse of disposability, you know, the Ubuntu style. See the person in their totality, the good that they do and the bad that they do, you know, and the learning that you can help them learn, and you need to learn for yourself. And the other thing I'll say is one of my mentors, and I hope we can get to the Q&A for the audience in a minute, is that Leonard Zeskin was the research director at the National Anti-Klan Network when I was there. And he told me to lighten up, because I used to take everything so seriously, like the revolution was tomorrow. And he said, no, Loretta, lighten up. He said, first of all, fighting Nazis should be fun. It's being a Nazi that sucks. So if you're not having fun doing this work, you need to check how you're doing the work, because you should have joy. Like Tony Cade used to say, make the revolution irresistible. You should have joy in fighting on the side of justice. Let the other people be miserable. And if we're doing this work in a way that's not bringing us joy, not bringing us relationship, not bringing us healing, then we're doing it wrong. Because you're not supposed to, you can't even invite people into a movement where you're going to make them feel worse about themselves than before they met you. Why would anybody want to come to that kind of movement? People can feel bad all by themselves. They don't need your help. So we need to figure out what we're doing wrong that's repelling people instead of attracting them.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I think, you know, we have a little bit of time. So maybe we can open it up for some questions from the audience.
And there was one in the chat, I think, back up, that I was like really interested in hearing Loretta's response to. Susan was asking, on the larger scale, do you see this as the primary cause of many social justice organizations being stuck in personnel issues instead of organizing? What's the effect of the growth of social media and the shrinking of face-to-face contact? I was just like, oh, I really want to hear that response.
Well, I want to refer people to Maurice Mitchell's article, Building Resilient Organizations, that he wrote in The Forge. He did a masterful expert analysis of the implosion of social justice organizations. and why we're making ourselves weakest at a time we need to be at our strongest. And it's largely done because people are desperately trying to do the right thing, but they're doing it the wrong way. I don't think they mean to blow up the organizations. These aren't fascists that have infiltrated us. You know? These are people desperate to have their values lived out in their organization. And so we just need to help them understand how to handle their values in a responsible way and treat the people that they're working with as if they're holding their hearts in their hands, and you don't want to squeeze too tight because they're as valuable to the movement as you are.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. And there was a question Brian had asked right before. So he says, I've called in folks in the past, but sometimes they don't want to sit down with me because they're afraid of confrontation. How does one reach that person in those cases? Love to hear from both of you.
You don't have the magic words to change people. So that's your ego telling you that that is the case. If people had magic words, couples wouldn't fight, families wouldn't fight. What you do is make the offering with grace and respect and love, and feel better about yourself because you offered it, even if the other person ain't ready to hear it yet. But you can't make them hear it. You can't, and everybody learns on their own timeline, in their own, learning curve. So who are you to judge their learning curve when you wouldn't want anybody judging yours?
Yeah, I can't add to that. Really, I think that's just right. Lean into love, loving call in, but you can't make anybody come to the table to talk about it.
But you can keep a seat at the table for them.
That's absolutely, yeah. And there was another question I'm looking at, but with Deetra, how are we helping our folks in their personal and how are we helping our folks in their personal and collective transformation, leading with and practicing our values?
I want to bring into this conversation a man called Chris Singleton, who y'all probably don't know, but his mama was killed in the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Y'all remember when that white supremacist came to that church and killed those 9 parishioners? In a newspaper interview, Chris Singleton said, "People criticize me for offering forgiveness to the man who killed my mama, but they don't realize forgiveness is a way of not giving that man a permanent home in my heart. It is a sign of strength, not weakness, to decide that I am going to not let the memory of my mother be overlaid by the man who killed her. I'm going to celebrate this as a harm reduction strategy, not as a sign of weakness." And so I constantly ask people, how well is that grudge you holding on to working for you? Is it making you happy? Is it making you peaceful? Is it bringing you joy? If not, could you consider letting it go? I mean, because we think we want to cling to our pain so much that it becomes a definition of who we are, not just an explanation of what we've been through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Deetra, for me as well, I think like something that I ask myself, and I have been asking myself, especially lately, is like, how are we, like, is around culture? Like, what kind of culture do we currently have, and what kind of culture do we want to create? And what are the processes? What are the things that need to be in place to create that culture where we're actually facilitating a collective transformation? Well, facilitating personal and collective transformations and leading with our values. And so that's something, and that can look like a lot of different things, depending, it could look like a lot of different things if it's like a nonprofit organization, a collective, within the family. But I think for me, it's like really having conversations about how we would like to be called in. What are our trigger points? Naming power dynamics that are felt but might not be talked about all the time. Having conversations about how we agree on holding each other accountable. It's kind of like those I can't think of my words right now, but those things that you do in preparation, and really having this collective understanding that conflict is going to happen. And so how are we going to deal with that when that time inevitably comes? It's like one thing that I think about when I read your question.
But the point I want to make is that we think accountability equals punishment, and that is why we end up weaponizing our knowledge against each other, alienating others, and then wondering why nobody wants to be held accountable when you're going to put them in front of a firing squad. Nobody runs towards the firing squad. And so we're thwarting our own goals of accountability when we use it as punishment.
Absolutely. Which gets to like this fundamental understanding of the world that we want to live in.
I don't want to walk through the world pretending I'm perfect. That's too much lying.
Yes. Like you said, Loretta, child, let it go. It's, and I love that, again, I just want to bring it back to we're talking about the art of strategy. And again, these connections, y'all forgive me, I'm a theater major, but these connections are jumping all over the place. And it's I think of that long movie that won all the things, a long title. And basically one of the people was saying that I understand essentially that love and forgiveness, this is how I operate on purpose, right? It's a strategy. It's how I go through life. So when we talk about the art of strategy, being intentional about leading with love and leading with forgiveness and seeing the humanity in other people versus the reflection of our traumas and our fears, that's part of it, right? That's how we build movements. It is a strategy to operate this way. It is a strategy to build in joy and love as well as resistance. And it reminded me what you're saying, Loretta, the quote, someone said it, I can't remember from what, but it's accountability without love is brutality. And we're just so get rid of them. And I just love that we're talking about seeing people as not disposable and staying in the ring with them. So, yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things that I really enjoy in thinking about calling in is how I feel myself growing in the process. I feel like every time, because I have to call myself in 1,000,000 times a day. I be wanting to call people out all the time, so don't even act like I'm some angel or something. I started to tweet something, and halfway through the tweet, I said, that's a mean thing to say. And I had to take it down because the first thought is not the thought I need to be putting in the universe quite often. And so I love the fact that I'm letting my brain decide who Loretta is versus my trauma decide who Loretta is. Because when I let the trauma decide who Loretta is, it's like I'm handing a remote control to the people who messed over me. And I don't like the channel that they chose, So I want my brain and my heart to decide who Loretta is. I want Loretta to always have a second thought about, why are you wanting to send this tweet out that is not going to be productive just because you got something smart ass to say? I just want to always edit myself that way, because that's not the love presentation I want to make of me.
Someone put in the chat, they weren't ready for the humble pie or something like that. I was like, look, I did not know you was going to be yelling at us like this. Miss Loretta, you are speaking so loud, but it's these things that we need to hear, right? We have to hear this, and it has to land for us to be better organizers, better liberators, better freedom fighters, and to build this world that we deserve and that we want together. So just thank you for all the gems, and whew, wasn't ready.
I want to uplift a question before we move into close and kind of like parting thoughts and comments. I want to uplift a question from Jules, which is how do you feel that the professionalizing of organizing work through legal structures impact or doesn't our capacities to move through conflict and cultivate vulnerable relationships? And Jules says, I'm thinking about how board of director culture can encourage masking, a commitment to rightness and white supremacy culture. And I'm wondering, Loretta, do you have any thoughts on that?
Over my 50 years, I've seen us go from all volunteer organizations sleeping on church basements to debating with people whether or not I can get them single rooms at the Hilton Resort. So the purpose of the human rights movement is not to have people sleeping on church basements, okay, with roaches. We need all the voices in the movement. We don't need to sit up here and say, well, we're the unpaid organizers versus the professionals. Or I'm the person without the degree versus the person with the degree. By the way, what you've been through is not a resume. It's just what you've been through. You still got to add some book learning to that stuff to be an expert on anything but yourself. So, you know, I don't know if I want to get into the kind of conflict of saying, well, the problem is when the lawyers get in, or the problem is when only the activists. We need everybody. There are so many pathways to the mountaintop. Who told you that yours is the only one that's right? And the fact that you think so says that you're not as woke. I always say, when you're in a woke competition, you're not nearly as woke as you think you are, because there ain't a woke competition.
Thank you so much for that. Sam, do you have any parting thoughts before we close out?
Just gratitude to you, Nina, to Loretta, to everyone on this call, to SMA. Like, this is amazing, and I'm so excited for the next one.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining today. And I want to encourage everyone to please do take advantage of the resources that have been dropped into the chat, the training invitation that Loretta mentioned earlier, and really, yeah, encouraging and inviting folks to lean into the nuance, lean into love, and lean into a exploration and maybe even an interrogation of the ways that we think about what accountability looks like in our liberatory vision. Not within our trauma, but really thinking about, like, what is the world that we are trying to build? What is the world that we are trying to live in? And so, yeah, thank you, Loretta, so much. You're a giant to so many people. I'm sure most people on this call. And I do encourage folks too who are just now being exposed to look into Loretta's work more. Thank you so much, Sam, for co-moderating this with me. And yeah, so please, thank you. And thank you to our guests and attendees, folks who took some time out of your day to come out and join us for this conversation. So yeah, please join us next month for the next conversation on July 26th. The Southern Movement Assembly's very own Glory Kalanko, who is the director of Women Watch Africa, and a fighter for human rights since organizing in her home country of Nigeria, will be speaking. And so please, there'll be two younger co-moderators as well. So please join us for that, y'all. And yeah, I want to make space, Loretta, if you have any last words to kind of end us with too.
The only thing I say is, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share what we're trying to build. We're building a human rights movement that contains women's rights and gay rights and civil rights and all of these things together. This is the movement Dr. King called on us to build in his last Sunday sermon 4 days before he was assassinated. And all I can say is everybody told me he had a dream, but nobody told me he had a plan. And so I'm part of that plan, and we can all be part of that plan to build that human rights movement in the US that holds the United States accountable here and globally. This is what we're doing.
Right on. Thanks, y'all. Enjoy the rest of your day in peace.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, y'all.